rain came in sideways off the county road, the kind that found every gap in a jacket and every crack in a windowsill, and Callie Mae Holt had been driving through it for 11 minutes with her wipers failing on the left side and her hands so tight on the wheel that her knuckles had gone white under the dash light. She did not turn on the radio. She did not check her mirrors more than she had to. She kept her eyes on the broken center line, and she counted the mile markers the way her father had taught her to count them when she was small and the world felt too large to hold. 1 marker, 2, 3. The trailer park where she rented the N unit had flooded twice that fall already, and the landlord had stopped returning calls. But tonight, that was not why she drove past it without slowing down. Tonight, the lights in her rear view were different. Not police lights, not the amber pulse of a county truck, just 2 headlights, high and wide, riding at a distance that never changed no matter how fast she went. She had first noticed them outside the strip mall on Route 47, where the nail salon and the dollar store closed at 9 and the parking lot emptied out to nothing. She had stopped for gas, taken 4 minutes at the pump, watched the white pickup idle under the far light without anyone getting out, and then understood that the feeling she had been carrying in her chest since Tuesday was not paranoia. It was information. Callie was 24 years old. She had her father's dark red hair and her mother's stubborn jaw and a small scar along her left forearm from a machine that had slipped during her first year of apprenticeship. She could shade a rose in under 40 minutes, and she could read a room the way her father had once read a highway, which meant she noticed exits before she noticed anything else. Right now, the nearest exit was a question. She passed the grain elevator, the Lutheran church with the broken gutters, the collapsed barn that the county had been arguing about for 3 years. The high headlights stayed with her. She thought about the sheriff's office on Crawford Street, the one with the parking lot that flooded, and the deputy who had known Grant Morrow since high school. She thought about driving to the gas station at the edge of town and asking the night attendant to call someone. She thought about her father. She turned left on Harlan Mill Road. The gravel lot at the end of Harlan Mill was not lit by anything county maintained. It was lit by a string of bare bulbs hung along the overhang of a metal building the size of a small airplane hangar, and by the glow of 2 open bay doors where engines were being worked on at 2 in the morning, because that was when the men of Steele County MC preferred to work. Callie had not been on this lot since she was 9 years old. She remembered it as bigger. She remembered the smell of it differently, not better, just differently, more like her childhood than anything else she could name. She parked beside a flatbed with Missouri plates and stepped out into the rain and the sound of a classic rock station playing from somewhere inside the second bay. The white pickup did not follow her onto the gravel. It slowed on Harlan Mill Road, sat for a moment under a stand of wet oaks, and then reversed back toward the highway. Callie stood in the rain and watched it go and felt her legs begin to shake. A man appeared in the nearest bay door. He was somewhere in his early 50s, broad through the chest, wearing a gray thermal with the sleeves pushed to the elbows and a Steele County MC vest over it. He had a wrench in one hand and a look on his face that was not welcome and was not threat, but was the particular expression of a man who had been interrupted and wanted to know why. He looked at her the way people looked at things they were trying to place. Callie looked back at him and felt something loosen in her chest without permission. Decker Walsh had gray in his beard that had not been there the last time she saw him, and his eyes were the same pale color they had been across her father's casket, steady and careful, and impossible to read from the outside. He had been 38 then. He was 52 now. The math was easy. The rest of it was not. He said slowly, "Callie, not a question, not a greeting, just the word the way you said a word when you were still deciding what it meant." She said they were following me. White pickup. They have been watching the shop since Tuesday, since I found the books. Decker did not move for a moment. Then he set the wrench down on the concrete lip of the bay door, wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket, and looked past her at the empty road. "Come inside," he said. The bay smelled like grease and metal and the particular warmth of a space that was heated by bodies and engines rather than anything installed in the walls. 3 other men were visible. One was under a Harley with a cracked frame working with a flashlight. One was at a workbench sorting fasteners into trays with the focused patience of someone who had been doing it for years. The third was younger, maybe late 20s, and he was watching Callie from the doorway to the back room with an expression that was not quite suspicion and not quite curiosity, but something balanced between them. Decker pulled a folding chair from beside the nearest workbench and set it near the heater without asking if she wanted it. Then he crossed his arms and looked at her. "Tell me from the beginning," he said. "Take your time." Callie sat down. She put her bag on her knees and pressed both hands against it, feeling the shape of what was inside. Her jacket was wet through. Her hair was sticking to the side of her face. She had not eaten since noon, and she was aware of this in the abstract, careful way you were aware of things that did not matter yet. She said, "I have been working for Grant Morrow for 3 years. You know who Grant Morrow is?" Decker's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "I know who he is. He owns 4 shops in the county. Morrow Inc. on Route 47, 2 in the Malstra in Sydney, 1 over in Wapakoneta. He brought me in from Columbus when he was opening the Route 47 location. He said he wanted someone with a real portfolio. He paid well. He let me set my own hours. He sent clients my way, and I sent clients his way, and it worked for about 2.5 years without anything being wrong, or at least without anything I could see." The man at the workbench had stopped sorting fasteners. The younger man in the doorway had not moved. She continued, "Tuesday night I stayed late to finish a sleeve piece on a regular client, a retired teacher who comes in every month. I finished around 11 and the client left. I was cleaning my station and the front desk computer crashed. Grant had asked me to run the inventory report for the Route 47 location before close on Wednesday, and I knew the software stored backups on the shared drive, so I logged into the main account to pull the file." She paused. "There were 2 sets of books," she said, "not hidden, just there in a folder labeled Route 47 Operations with a date range going back 4 years. One set was what I had been looking at every month when Grant asked me to check supply orders. The other set showed numbers I did not recognize at first. Then I recognized them. They were 2 round client payments in cash that matched the supply invoice totals to the dollar. No variation, no variance. Hundreds of them. Going back to when the first shop opened." Decker said, "You screenshotted them." "I sent them to my personal email before I closed the session. Then I closed the session. Then I drove home. I did not sleep." He was quiet for a moment. "How certain are you that he does not know you saw them?" "He knows. The next morning, Grant called me before I reached the shop. Said the system flagged an irregular login. Said it was probably nothing, probably just a crash, but wanted to check with me. He was very calm. He was the same way he always was. But Rex was in the parking lot when I pulled in." "Who is Rex?" "Travis Rex. He manages the Sydney locations, former sheriff's deputy. He was not supposed to be at Route 47 that day." Decker looked at the younger man in the doorway and gave him a single small nod. The younger man disappeared into the back room. Callie said, "I worked the full shift. I did not look at anyone differently. I finished at 6 and I drove to my trailer, and the white pickup was parked on the county road a quarter-mile back, just past the tree line. It was there Wednesday night. It was there Thursday morning. Tonight when I left, it followed me." Decker unfolded his arms and pulled another chair from beside the workbench, turning it backward and sitting with his forearms resting on the top rail. He looked at her the way she remembered him looking at her father, like he was reading something in a language he was very good at. "Why did you come here?" he said. "Because I did not know where else to go, that they would not follow me through the door," she said. It was true. It was also not the whole truth. The whole truth was that her father's name was Dale Holt, and that Dale Holt had ridden with Steele County MC for 11 years before leaving on good terms when Callie's mother got sick, and he decided that the life of a mechanic was better for a family than the life of a club member. He had stayed on Decker's crew as a civilian contractor for 2 years, after that doing engine work, doing runs when they needed an extra set of hands, with no affiliation attached. He had been dead for 15 years. Pancreatic cancer, the death certificate said. A fast kind, a kind that took him in 4 months from diagnosis to the ground. Callie had believed that for 15 years. She reached into the canvas bag and took out a vest. It was a Steele County MC riding vest, the original style from before they updated the backpatch design, black leather, that had gone soft with age. The bottom rocker faded from years of road sun. The front panel still had the club pin on the left chest and her father's road name Holt hand-stamped into a leather tag sewn below it. Decker's jaw tightened. She said, "He left it to me in the storage unit. Not to my mother. To me. With a note that said, 'Keep it safe until you need it.' I thought he meant as a memory. I kept it in a box for 15 years. I never wore it. I barely looked at it." She held it out across the space between them. She said, "On Wednesday night after the white pickup showed up, I could not sleep, and I took it out of the box, and I was holding it, and I felt something in the lining, something sewn in. Decker did not take the vest immediately. He looked at it the way you looked at something that was going to change the shape of the next hour of your life, and you knew it. She turned the collar back. The interior lining along the back panel had been carefully opened and restitched, at some point the thread slightly darker than the original, the line of stitching, even but not factory even. The kind of repair done by someone who knew how to use a needle, but was working quickly and under pressure. Decker went to the workbench, returned with a small folding knife. He looked at her once. She nodded. He worked the thread out with the blade tip careful and unhurried 2 inches of seam coming apart to reveal the edge of a sleeve no wider than a thumb. Inside the sleeve was a USB drive, black and generic, the kind sold at any drugstore, and beneath the USB was a folded piece of paper. Decker set both on the workbench without opening either. He looked at Callie for a long moment. "How much do you know about why your father left the club?" he said. "He said it was for our family," she said. "That was part of it. What was the other part?" The younger man came back from the rear room and set a cup of coffee near Callie's chair without a word. She looked at it and then at Decker and waited. Decker picked up the folded paper and opened it slowly, and his face did something she had not seen a face do in a long time. It did not become sad. It did not become angry. It became still the way a body of water went still when the wind stopped and the surface reflected everything perfectly before anything moved. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at the bare bulbs swinging slightly in the draft from the open bay door. "Your father," he said. "Your father was a very careful man." She said, "What does it say?" He turned it so she could read it. The handwriting was her father's, smaller than she remembered, cramped the way hands cramped when they were writing fast or writing in the dark. The date at the top was May 14th, 2009, 8 months before he died. The paper was line torn from a spiral notebook, and there were watermarks at the bottom edge that might have been rain and might have been something else. The note said, "If Callie found this, something went wrong before I could finish it. The USB has 4 years of account records for Morrow Inc. original location and the cash routing through the shell company TRM Holdings. I have been documenting since 2007. I made contact with an agent named Farris, Federal Bureau, Cincinnati Field Office. His direct number is at the bottom. If I am gone and you are reading this, it means I could not get it to him myself. Do not take it to the county. Do not take it to anyone Grant Morrow has ever bought a meal for. Take it to Decker Walsh. He will know what to do." Callie read it 3 times. The rain outside had lightened to a sound like static. The man under the Harley had stopped working. The man at the workbench had turned on his stool and was looking at the floor. She said he was documenting Grant Morrow. "For at least 2 years before he died," Decker said. She said, "The cancer." Decker looked at her carefully. She said, "Was it?" He said, "I do not know that. I have not known that. But I have had a feeling about it for a long time, and I have not been able to prove it, and I have not known how to tell you something I could not prove." The world had been the same shape for 15 years. She had lived in it, worked in it, grieved in it. Now she was sitting in a metal building on Harlan Mill Road with her father's vest in her lap and a USB drive on a workbench, and the feeling was not grief exactly, and it was not rage exactly. It was the sensation of a floor dropping away and finding that the ground below it was ground you could stand on. Hard and cold and real, but ground. She picked up the USB. "Can you open it?" she said. Decker shook his head. "It is encrypted. The icon shows a password lock. We are going to need someone who knows what they are doing." She thought for a moment. Then she said, "Lena." Decker looked at her. "Lena Marsh, she works the Sydney location. She has been there since the beginning. I thought she was just a lifer, someone who stayed because she did not want the trouble of leaving. But she knew my father. I found that out 6 months ago. She has a photograph of him in her locker that she has never explained, and I never asked about." Decker was quiet. She said she knew him, and if she knew him well enough to keep his photograph for 15 years, she might know more than what she kept in her locker. The younger man, whose name Callie did not know yet, said from the edge of the room, "If Morrow's man Rex is already watching you, he may be watching her too." Callie said, "I know. That is why we have to move before morning." She did not say "we" as if she had always been part of this room. She said it because there was no other word that fit. She had driven here through the rain because of a feeling and a memory and a dead man's careful handwriting, and now she was sitting in the middle of a problem that had apparently started before she was old enough to understand what problems were. Decker picked up the USB and held it for a moment, turning it once, and then set it carefully on the fabric of the vest on the faded patch above her father's road name. He said, "Your father trusted me to do something I did not know he was asking me to do. That is the kind of thing that takes a while to sit with." She said, "We do not have a while." He looked at her. She said, "The white pickup will be back by morning. Rex does not leave things half finished. He got fired from the department because he kept finishing things past the point he was supposed to stop." Decker was quiet for a long time. The bare bulbs swung once and settled. The rain ticked against the metal roof. Then he looked at the younger man and said, "Call Briggs. Tell him we need the van and we need Lena Marsh's home address cross-checked against anything Rex filed with county in the last 6 months." The younger man moved without speaking. Decker looked back at Callie. He said, "You should know something about this club, about what we do and what we do not do." She said, "I know what you do. I grew up watching you." He said, "Then you know we do not go looking for trouble outside our lane." She said, "I know, but this trouble came looking for me. And my father drew a map to this garage 15 years ago, and I am the one who followed it." Decker walked to the bay door, and looked out at the gravel lot where her car sat in the rain, still wet headlights off the small chrome detail on the hood catching the string lights from above. He said, "Your father was one of the best men I ever knew. He was also a man who carried things alone longer than he should have." Callie said, "He left me a map." Decker turned. She said, "He did not carry it alone at the end. He left me everything he had, and he pointed it at you. That is not a man carrying things alone. That is a man trusting the right person to finish what he started." Decker looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that was not approval and was not assessment, but was something older than both. He said, "All right." He picked up the vest and held it out to her the way you held out something that belonged to someone and had only been in your hands temporarily. She took it. She did not put it on. She folded it carefully over her arm the way she had seen her father fold a jacket inside out, the lining protected. Decker said, "We move in 30 minutes. We go to Lena's house clean, no colors, 2 people maximum. We do not spook her. You do the talking." She said, "I know how to talk to her." He said, "I know you do. That is why I said it." The man from under the Harley stood and wiped his hands on a shop rag. The man at the workbench turned back to his fasteners. The younger man came back from the rear room with a piece of paper and a look on his face that was not quite alarm and was not quite calm. He said to Decker, "Rex filed a civil harassment complaint against Callie Mayholt with the county magistrate's office at 4 this afternoon. It has a no-contact provision. She is not supposed to approach any Morrow Inc. employee or location." Callie looked at the paper. She said, "He moved fast." The younger man said he had it ready. The filing was already drafted. He just needed a date. She understood then what Tuesday night had really been. Not a discovery, a trigger. She had tripped something that had been set for a long time waiting for exactly this, and the machinery had started running the moment she walked out of the Route 47 shop with screenshots on her phone. Decker said to her quietly, "Can you prove where you were tonight?" She said, "I drove. I was alone. The rain is the only thing that saw me." He said, "Then for tonight you were not here." She looked at him. He said, "I am not protecting myself. I am protecting the chain of what you found. The moment your name appears on a no-contact violation, anything you hand to anyone becomes evidence of bad faith. We need your hands clean for what comes next." It was the kind of logic her father would have respected. She could see that clearly. She said, "What do I do tonight?" He said, "You go to the La Quinta on Route 47, the one past the county line. You pay cash. You do not use your phone. You sleep if you can. I will have someone outside the lot before you check in." She said, "And Lena?" He said, "We will go to Lena. Tonight while you are somewhere, they can see you and account for you." She stood, picked up her bag, looked once at the workbench where the USB still sat on the vest's faded fabric. She said, "What if she does not know anything?" Decker picked up the USB and held it toward her. She said, "You keep it. You keep it somewhere. They will not find it on me." He folded his hand around it. She said, "My father trusted you with the most important thing he had. I am doing the same thing." Decker looked at her steadily. He said, 15 years is a long time for something like this to wait." She said, "He was patient. He was also right." She walked to the bay door. The rain was down to a drizzle now, the kind that felt like cold breath rather than water. The gravel lot was quiet. The county road was empty. Somewhere to the east past the grain elevator, and the Lutheran church, in the collapsed barn that nobody had fixed the highway, ran on towards Sydney, and the four shops Grant Morrow owned in name and controlled in something else entirely. She thought about her father getting up early every morning and driving his truck to a job that paid enough and coming home with grease on his hands and asking her at dinner what she had learned that day. She thought about the way he had folded his riding jacket inside out, the lining protected. She thought about a man who had kept a secret for 2 years while his body ran out of time, who had used the last of his careful patience to sew a small drive into a collar and leave a note that started with the word if. If Callie found this, he had known she would. She walked out into the drizzle and did not run to her car. She walked the way Decker walked, the way her father had walked, like someone who was not fleeing but was heading somewhere and knew exactly where that was. The string lights over the bay door caught the wet gravel and made it look almost like something worth looking at. She got in her car and drove east on Harlan Mill Road without turning on her high beams. At the county road, she turned north. At Route 47, she turned east again, and within 4 miles she could see the La Quinta sign glowing orange above the service road, warm and ordinary and temporary, the way most shelter was. She did not look in her mirror. The white pickup was not there. She parked in the middle of the lot under the light where anyone watching would have to be seen to watch her, and she sat for a moment with the engine idling and her hands in her lap. Her father had been 37 when he started documenting Grant Morrow. He had been 40 when the diagnosis came. He had been 41 when he died in the spring bedroom of the house on Crane Road, with the maple outside the window and her mother holding his hand and Callie sitting on the floor in the hall because the room was too small and the feeling in it was too large. She had been 9 years old. She had not known what she was losing beyond the obvious and enormous fact of him. Now she was 24 and she knew exactly what she had inherited. Not grief, not only grief, a direction. A job left half-finished by a careful man who had trusted the right people with the right pieces at exactly the right time and who had trusted her most of all with the beginning. She turned off the engine. She sat in the quiet of the lot with the orange sign humming above her and the rain tapping off, and she thought about the drive ahead of her, not tonight's drive, but the longer one, the one that started with a USB in a dead man's vest and ended somewhere she could not yet see clearly. Then she got out of the car and walked toward the motel office with her head up and her bag on her shoulder and the smell of rain still in her hair. 30 minutes north of her on Harlan Mill Road, Decker Walsh was putting on a plain dark jacket over his thermal, leaving the vest on the hook by the bay door, and telling the younger man, whose name was Briggs, to drive careful and park 2 streets over and not to knock on Lena Marsh's door before they had watched the block for 10 minutes. Briggs said, "What are we looking for?" Decker said, "Anything that moves when it should not." They drove north in the dark with the last of the rain on the windshield and nothing on the radio, and the USB drive was in Decker's left breast pocket, and the note from a dead man he had ridden with for 11 years was folded carefully in the same pocket beside it, and the weight of both of them together was the exact weight of something that had been waiting a long time to land. Lena Marsh lived in a white rental house on Sycamore Street, the kind of block where every house had a chain-link fence, and a motion light, and a dog that barked at cars, but not at people it recognized. The house was dark when Decker and Briggs parked 2 streets over and walked in from the alley side, moving along the fence line without hurrying. Briggs said quietly, "Nothing on the street, no parked vehicles that do not belong." Decker said, "Give it another 5 minutes." They stood in the shadow of a utility pole and watched the blocks settle around them. A cat moved along the top of a fence 3 houses down. A television flickered behind a curtain 2 doors from Lena's. The motion light above her side door did not trigger. After 5 minutes, Decker walked to her front door and knocked twice, not loudly. Nothing for 30 seconds. Then the porch light came on and a voice from behind the door said, "Who is it?" The voice was awake, not groggy, not startled. Awake in the way people were awake when they had not been sleeping. Decker said, "Walsh, Steele County. I knew Dale Holt." The silence that followed was long enough to have a shape. Then the deadbolt turned. Lena Marsh was 38 years old, medium height, with forearms covered in her own work, in the particular steadiness of someone who had been carrying something difficult for a long time and had gotten used to the weight of it. She was in jeans and a flannel shirt. She had clearly been sitting at her kitchen table rather than in bed because there was a mug of cold coffee and an open notebook on the table, and the overhead light was on. She looked at Decker. She looked at Briggs. She looked back at Decker. She said, is Callie safe? Decker said, yes. How long have you known she might not be? Lena stepped back from the door and let them in. She sat at the table and wrapped both hands around the cold mug. She said, since Tuesday. Rex came to the Sydney shop Wednesday morning and asked me which employees had access to the main account login. He was very casual about it. He said it was a security audit. I knew what it was. Decker sat across from her. Briggs stayed near the door. Decker said, did you tell him anything? She said I told him I did not know who had the login besides Grant and the managers. I told him I only had access to the supply order system. He said, was that true? She said no. She opened the notebook on the table and pushed it toward him. Inside were columns of figures handwritten dated back 14 months. Supply invoice numbers cross-referenced with client cash payment. Records, the same pattern Callie had found in the digital files but assembled by hand from paper receipts Lena had been quietly photographing for over a year. Decker looked at the notebook for a long moment. He said, you have been doing this on your own. She said, I have been doing this because Dale asked me to before he died. He asked me to keep watching after he was gone. He said if anything ever moved, if the operation ever expanded, or if someone else got close to finding it, I should be ready. Decker said he asked you to wait 15 years. She said he asked me to wait until it was time. He said I would know when it was time. She looked at the notebook. She said when Callie took that job at Route 47, I knew. I watched her for 2 years and she was careful and professional and she did not ask questions. Then she found the files on her own the same way Dale found them by accident during a system crash. And I thought, that is it. That is when. Decker said the USB, do you know what is on it? She looked at him directly. She said, I know his password. I have known it for 15 years. He gave it to me the last time I saw him, 3 weeks before he went into the hospital. He said the drive was in the vest, and the vest was for Callie, and the password was for me, and he said make sure those two things find each other. Briggs said from the door. He built a 2-key system. Lena said he was careful. He did not want one person holding everything. He did not want it to be too easy to take from one place. He wanted it to require at least 2 people who trusted each other to make it work. Decker said he trusted you with half of it. She said we were close. Before Callie's mother, before he left the club, we were close for a long time. There was no drama in the way she said it. It was a fact from a long time ago that had settled into something quieter than either sadness or regret. Decker said, we need to move quickly. Rex filed a no-contact provision against Callie this afternoon. If he is moving on legal instruments, he is escalating. He wants her discredited before she can do anything with what she found. Lena nodded slowly. She said Grant will use the theft angle. He will say she took proprietary client data. He has done it before. There was an apprentice in Wapakoneta 2 years ago who found something in the supply records and Grant had him fired and filed a civil complaint before the kid could talk to anyone. Decker said, what happened to him? She said he moved away. Cincinnati, I think. He was 22 and he was alone, and he did not have anyone to help him hold the line. Decker looked at the notebook. He said, we need the drive open tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. Lena said, I know. She stood, went to the kitchen counter, and opened the cabinet beneath the coffee maker. From the back of the cabinet, she took a small laptop, older, a model 4 or 5 years out of date, and set it on the table. She said it has never been connected to the internet. I bought it used with cash 2 years ago specifically for this. Dale told me not to open the files on anything traceable. Briggs said quietly, your father planned a long way ahead. This was meant for Decker, but Lena heard it. She said he was the kind of man who understood that doing the right thing slowly and carefully was better than doing it fast and broken. He just ran out of time before he could finish it himself. She held out her hand toward Decker. He took the USB from his breast pocket and placed it in her palm. She plugged it into the laptop and the screen came up with a single password field. She typed without hesitating 12 characters and the drive opened to a folder structure that filled the screen. All 3 of them looked at it for a moment. 4 years of records from the original Morrow Inc. location organized by month. A separate folder labeled TRM Holdings with financial routing documents, account numbers, and a series of email exchanges between Grant Morrow and a contact identified only by initials. A third folder labeled Personal, which contained a scanned document, 3 pages handwritten by Dale Holt, describing in plain language how he had come to understand what Grant Morrow was doing when he had first suspected it and what he had observed and documented. At the bottom of the 3rd page was a name and a phone number. Special Agent Carl Ferris, FBI, Cincinnati Field Office. Lena said, "He is still there. I checked 6 months ago. He is still active." Decker looked at her. She said, "I have been checking every 6 months for 15 years, waiting for the moment." Decker said, "Print everything. All of it. 2 copies. One goes with Briggs tonight to a location I will tell you separately. One stays here in a place that is not this house." She was already opening the print settings. He said, "And Lena, after tonight you need to not be here. You need to be somewhere they cannot reach you before we can make the call to Ferris." She said, "I have a sister in Findlay. I have not visited in 2 years. There is no connection between her address and my name in any current record." He said, "Go tonight, before morning." She said, "I know." While the printer ran, Decker stepped outside and called Callie at the number she had given him for the motel's front desk, leaving his name as Walsh, and asking the clerk to pass a message that said simply, "Both keys found. Moving tonight. Stay put." He came back inside and looked at the pages coming off the printer, page after page of a dead man's careful work, and felt the weight of 15 years pressed briefly against the back of his throat before he put it somewhere it would not interfere with what needed to be done. Callie did not sleep. She lay on top of the motel comforter in her jacket and watched the orange glow of the parking lot light move across the ceiling as trucks passed on Route 47, and she thought about her father. She thought about a specific Tuesday, one of dozens, that blurred together from her childhood when he had come home late from a bomb and sat at the kitchen table after dinner with a cup of coffee and a piece of paper, writing something in his small, cramped hand. She had asked him what he was writing, and he had said notes, just work notes, and she had accepted that because she was 9 and notes were boring, and she had gone back to her drawing. She had been drawing even then, animals mostly, dogs and horses, and once a very ambitious attempt at an elephant that her father had taped to the refrigerator and left there until the tape dried and the paper fell. She wondered now if the paper he had been writing on that Tuesday was a page like the one she had read tonight, careful and specific, and aimed at a future he was not certain he would reach. Her phone had a message from the front desk. "Both keys found. Moving tonight. Stay put." She put the phone face down on the nightstand and closed her eyes and did not sleep, but rested, which was the closest thing available. In the morning, she bought coffee from the motel vending machine and sat in the plastic chair by the window and watched the parking lot fill with early trucks and a school van and a man walking a limping terrier on a short leash. Normal morning things. The world conducting its ordinary business while somewhere on the other side of the county, a USB drive was being printed into 2 paper copies and a woman was packing a bag to drive to Findlay. At 8:15, Briggs knocked on her door. He had brought a paper bag from the gas station down the road, 2 breakfast sandwiches and an orange juice, and he sat in the other plastic chair and ate his own sandwich while she ate hers, and he told her what had happened at Lena's house. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Lena has been waiting 15 years for me to show up and find those files." Briggs said, "It looks that way." She said, "My father built something he could not finish, and he left instructions for 2 different people who did not know they were each holding half of it." Briggs said, "Your father sounds like someone who thought things through." She said he was a mechanic. He understood that a system only works when all the parts are present and connected properly. He was building a system. Briggs looked at her. He said, "Decker wants you at the garage at 10, not for long, just long enough to talk through the next step." She said, "The FBI contact, Ferris." He said, "Decker thinks we should not call from any number connected to the club. He wants you to make the call. Your father is the one who set up the contact, and your name is the one on the original note." She finished her coffee. She said, "I will make the call." At the garage, Decker spread the printed pages across the workbench and walked her through the structure of what her father had assembled. The financial records alone were substantial. 4 years of cash transactions routed through TRM Holdings, a shell company registered in Delaware with a registered agent address that had been used for dozens of similar entities over the past decade. The email exchanges added context, showing Grant directing the routing and discussing the expansion plan that had eventually produced the Sydney and Wapakoneta locations. The personal statement from Dale Holt described his own discovery, the moment in 2007, when he had been repairing a computer at the original shop and accidentally opened a folder he was not supposed to see, and the decision he had made to say nothing and begin documenting instead. He had written, "And I knew that one complaint without evidence would be laughed out of the county. Grant knows too many people. He has bought too many meals. I needed to build something that could not be ignored. I needed it to be so complete that there was no room left for doubt. Callie read that paragraph twice. She said he understood how Grant would fight it. Decker said your father was observant. He watched people carefully. He knew Grant would use his reputation as a shield, and he knew that reputation could only be overcome by weight of evidence. She said, did you know any of this? Any part of it? While it was happening? Decker was quiet for a moment. He said, I knew your father was worried about something in the last year before the diagnosis. He was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. I asked him once if there was something I should know. He said not yet. He said he would tell me when he had what he needed. He said he died before he had it, or before he thought he had it. She said he had enough. He just needed Lena to hold the password. The younger man, Briggs said from across the garage, Grant filed a civil complaint this morning against Callie and against Lena. Both of them. Lena for breach of employment contract. He is claiming she took client records. Decker said, how did he know about Lena? Briggs said Rex must have been watching her too, or someone in the shop told him she was asking questions. Callie said, is Lena already on the road? Briggs said, she left at 4 this morning. She is in Findlay. Grant was accelerating. The civil filings were a legal instrument, but they were also a message, a demonstration that he had resources and speed, and that he intended to use both. The no-contact provisions, the breach of contract, claims the implied threat of further action. These were the moves of a man who had used the same playbook before and watched it work. Callie looked at the printed pages spread across the workbench and thought about the apprentice in Wapakoneta who had found something and been alone and had moved to Cincinnati before he could talk to anyone. She said, we call Ferris today. Decker said yes. She said from a landline, not connected to you or me or anyone in this room. He said there is a payphone at the truck stop on 33. It still works. I checked last month. She looked at him. He said, I check it periodically, in case. She said, you have been thinking about this kind of situation for a while. He said, your father was my friend for 11 years. After he died, I noticed things. Small things. The way Grant Morrow expanded quickly. The way certain conversations stopped when I was nearby at county events. I did not have evidence of anything. I only had a feeling that something was not finished. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the bay door. He said, let's go make the call. They drove to the truck stop in Decker's pickup, Callie in the passenger seat with the printed pages in the canvas bag on her knees. Route 33 ran flat between harvested fields under a gray sky, the kind of October morning that looked like a photograph of itself. Decker drove at exactly the speed limit. The payphone was at the back corner of the truck stop lot near the air hoses, and the dumpster enclosure a relic that the station owner had apparently never gotten around to removing. It smelled like rain and exhaust. Callie stood in front of it and looked at the number at the bottom of her father's statement. She had memorized it on the drive over. She picked up the receiver, deposited the coins Decker had given her, and dialed. The line rang twice. Then a man answered with his last name clear and flat, the way people answered when they were used to calls that required immediate focus. She said, my name is Callie Mae Holt. My father was Dale Holt. He contacted you in 2009 regarding a money laundering operation connected to Grant Morrow and a shell company called TRM Holdings. He died before he could complete the contact. I have the documentation he assembled, and I have additional records extending through the present day, and I need to know if this case is still open. There was a pause on the line. Not a long pause. The kind of pause that meant the person on the other end was already thinking rather than reacting. Ferris said Dale Holt. She said yes. He said, Ms. Holt, where are you calling from? She said, a payphone in Shelby County. I am not using any traceable device. He said, are you safe right now? She said, right now, yes. But I have 2 civil complaints filed against me in the last 24 hours in a vehicle that has been surveilling me since Tuesday. I do not have a lot of time before the legal pressure makes it harder to move. Ferris said, I need you to listen carefully. That case has never been closed. There have been periods of inactivity due to resource limitations, but the file has remained open. What you are describing would constitute new material evidence. I need to meet with you in person, not a phone call, in person with whatever documentation you have. She said, how soon? He said, today if possible, tomorrow at the latest. I can be in Shelby County by early afternoon. She looked at Decker, who could not hear the other end but was watching her face. She said into the phone, there is a diner called Rosewood on Route 33, east of the Route 47 junction. I will be there at 1 o'clock. Come alone or with one other agent. Do not contact any local law enforcement before we speak. Ferris said, understood. I will need a description of you for the meeting. She said, I will be the one who looks like she has not slept. I will have a canvas bag. I will be at the booth farthest from the door. He said, I will be there at 1. She hung up and stood for a moment with her hand still on the receiver, feeling the cold metal of it and the cold air off the fields, and the particular sensation of having done the thing you have been building toward without knowing you were building toward it. Decker said, well, she said 1 o'clock at Rosewood Diner. He is coming today. Decker looked at the sky for a moment. He said, your father would have liked to see this morning. She said he planned this morning. He just was not able to be here for it. They drove back toward the garage, and Callie sat with the bag on her knees and thought about the meeting at 1 o'clock and about Lena safe in Findlay and about the white pickup that had not appeared since the night before and about all the ordinary things that continued happening around the edges of a situation that was not ordinary at all. She thought about Grant Morrow opening his office at 10 o'clock with his coffee and his civil filings and his certainty that he had moved fast enough. She thought about her father at 37, sitting at a computer in the original Route 47 location, opening a folder he was not supposed to see and deciding in that moment to say nothing and begin watching instead. She understood now why he had never seemed hurried. He had been playing a game with a very long horizon, and he had raised her to be patient without telling her that was what he was teaching her. Every time he had made her sit with a difficult drawing, instead of giving up and starting over, every time he had told her that the difference between a good tattoo and a great one was not talent, but willingness to look at a thing until you understood it, every time he had said that the most important thing about any system was knowing which piece connected to which, he had been teaching her the only way he knew how. She had not understood it while it was happening. She understood it now. At 11:30, she changed into clean clothes in the motel bathroom and combed her hair and put the printed pages in order in the canvas bag. At 12:15, Decker drove her to Rosewood Diner and parked across the road. He said, I will be in the lot, not inside. You do this yourself. It is yours to do. She said, I know. He said, if anything feels wrong, you walk out. You do not explain. You just walk out and get in the truck. She said, nothing is going to feel wrong. He said, probably not, but I want you to know the door is there. She looked at him. She said, you knew my father for 11 years. What was he like when he was happy? Decker thought for a moment. He said, he laughed with his whole face. He was the kind of man who made a room feel more settled just by being in it. He was very good at being still. She nodded. She got out of the truck and crossed the road and pushed through the glass door of Rosewood Diner at 12:58, and Nora Bennett, who had been the waitress there for 16 years and had seen most of what Shelby County contained, gave her a nod and reached for the coffee pot and pointed with her chin toward the back booth farthest from the door. Special Agent Carl Ferris was already there. He was 51 years old in a plain dark jacket with the kind of face that had spent decades listening carefully and showing very little. He had a cup of coffee in front of him and both hands on the table where she could see them. He looked up when she came in and his expression did something brief and complicated and then settled. He said, you look like your father. Callie sat down across from him and put the canvas bag on the table between them. She said, then you know I am not leaving until this is finished. He looked at the bag. He said, show me what you have. She opened it and began. Carl Ferris did not reach for the papers immediately. He let Callie set them out page by page, and he read each one in the order she placed it, which was the order her father had organized them 15 years ago, and which told the story in the only sequence that made sense. The diner stayed quiet around them. Nora refilled Callie's coffee once without being asked, and then did not return to the booth. The lunch crowd was thin on a weekday, truckers mostly a table of retired men near the window, a young woman with a laptop near the counter. No one paid attention to the two people in the back booth with the spread of papers. Ferris read slowly. He turned pages back to cross-reference numbers. He spent 4 minutes on Dale Holt's personal statement, reading it twice the way Callie had read it, and when he finished the second reading, he set it carefully on top of the stack and folded his hands over it. He said your father was meticulous. She said he was a mechanic. He thought in systems. Ferris said the TRM Holdings routing is consistent with what we identified in 2009, but were unable to fully document. He was ahead of us. What he assembled here would have been sufficient to support a federal warrant at the time if we had received it. She said he died before he could get it to you. Ferris said, I know. I received a message through a mutual contact in early 2010 that Dale Holt had passed and that the contact had gone cold. I kept the file open because the operation did not stop. It simply became quieter. The expansion into multiple locations over the last decade was consistent with an operation growing in scale and confidence. She said Lena Marsh has a second set of records covering the last 14 months, handwritten cross-referenced. She is currently in Finley with her sister. She is willing to testify. Ferris said I will need to speak with her, today if possible. Callie said I can arrange that. He said, the civil complaints filed against you this morning are a pressure tactic. They will not survive contact with what you have here, but they need to be addressed carefully. Do you have legal representation? She said no. He said I can connect you with an attorney through the Bureau's Victim Advocacy Unit. Someone outside the county. Someone Grant Morrow has not bought a meal for. She recognized her father's phrase coming back out of Ferris's mouth, absorbed from the note, into the conversation as if Dale Holt were still in the room choosing the right words. She said, yes, I would like that. Ferris began photographing the pages with a phone that was not a personal device, methodical and thorough, and Callie watched the winter light come through the diner windows and fall across her father's handwriting in the careful way light fell on things that had waited a long time to be seen. When he finished photographing, he said, I want to be direct with you about what happens next. A federal investigation of this scope takes time. There will be a period during which Grant Morrow is not yet aware that the Bureau has re-engaged this case, and that period is valuable and needs to be protected. I am asking you not to discuss this meeting with anyone outside of the people directly involved. She said the people at Steele County, MC Decker Walsh. He said you trust them. She said my father trusted them. He built his safety plan around them. He chose them deliberately. Ferris was quiet for a moment. He said, I have no active concerns about Steele County MC from a federal perspective. I have been aware of the club for many years, and my primary observation is that they operate within a specific code that tends to be consistent and predictable. Your father's choice to involve them suggests he understood something about their reliability that I have no reason to dispute. She said he knew who they were. He also knew who Grant Morrow was. He chose accordingly. Ferris picked up Dale Holt's personal statement one more time, looked at the last page, looked at his own name, written at the bottom in her father's small handwriting, and placed it back on the stack. He said, I will drive to Finlay this afternoon to speak with Lena Marsh. I will file for a preservation order on Morrow Inc. financial records before the end of the business day. I will need you available by phone through the Bureau attorney, not directly for any follow-up questions over the next 72 hours. She said, I will be available. He said, is there somewhere you can stay that is not your trailer? Somewhere outside the county. She thought about it. She said, yes. He said, good. Go there tonight and stay there until I contact you through the attorney. He gathered the papers into a neat stack, and placed them in a document folder from his jacket pocket and looked at her directly. He said, your father spent 2 years building something he did not live to complete. You spent 15 years not knowing you were carrying the other half of it. The fact that you are sitting here today means both things went right despite the time between them. She said he was patient. Ferris said, so were you. You just did not know that was what you were doing. He left the diner at a measured pace, not hurrying, paying for his coffee at the counter, nodding once to Nora, and pushing out through the glass door into the gray October afternoon. Callie sat alone in the back booth for a moment with her empty canvas bag and her coffee cup and the particular stillness of a room after something important has happened in it. Nora came over and refilled her coffee without asking. She said, you doing all right, hun? Callie looked up to her. She said, I think so. I think things are moving in the right direction. Nora said, that tends to be enough for one afternoon. She left the coffee and went back to the counter. Callie called Decker from the diner's landline. She told him the meeting had gone as planned and that Ferris was driving to Finley. She told him she needed a place outside the county for at least 3 days and that she needed it to not be connected to her name or his. He said Briggs has a cousin in Van Wert, clean address, quiet block room to spare. She said that works. He said I will have Briggs drive you out tonight before dark. She said before I go, I need to go back to the trailer. There are things there I do not want Grant's people to find if he decides to send someone. Decker said I will have 2 people there when you arrive. She said, tell them to wait outside. I need to do it myself. Brief pause. He said, all right. The trailer on the county road looked exactly as she had left it, the porch light on the small window box empty of the flowers that had died in September. 2 Steele County men were parked in a pickup at the road end of the lot, visible not pretending to be invisible, which was its own kind of message to anyone watching. She went inside and moved through her own home with the efficient calm of someone taking inventory. Her portfolio, 12 years of documentation of her best work, original photographs, and client reference sheets. Her hard drives, 2 of them, containing the business records from her freelance work before Morrow Inc. The small wooden box from her dresser that contained her father's watch and her mother's wedding ring, and the photograph of the 3 of them from a state fair when Callie was 6, all of them squinting into the sun. She stood in her kitchen for a moment and looked at the ordinary accumulation of a life, the coffee maker she had bought with her first month of borrowing, pay the cast iron pan her mother had used until it was black and smooth as glass. The window above the sink that looked out at a field where something had been growing all summer and was now cut flat. She was not afraid. She had expected to be afraid, and she was not. She felt instead the clean sensation of a thing that had been confused becoming clear, the feeling of understanding which parts connected to which. She packed what mattered into 2 bags and left what did not matter and on the shelves and counters where it had always been ordinary and undisturbed a life that would keep its shape until she came back for it. She locked the door behind her. The drive to Van Wert took 40 minutes on roads that ran straight through flat farm country. Briggs, at the wheel, the radio off, the sky going dark orange in the west ahead of them. She sat in the passenger seat with the 2 bags at her feet and her father's watch in her jacket pocket where she could feel it. Briggs said after a while, "Your old man, he must have been something." She said, "I thought I knew who he was. I knew him in one way. Turned out there was another whole layer that he was keeping safe until the right moment." Briggs said, "Sounds like a good father." She said he was, both versions of him. She stayed 3 days in Van Wert, in a small bedroom with a window that looked at a yard with a rusted swing set. Briggs's cousin was a woman named Pat, who asked no questions and made very good coffee and was apparently accustomed to hosting people who needed to be somewhere quiet for a few days. The bureau attorney called on the second morning through a number Callie had been given, a woman named Hendricks Sharp and Practical, who walked her through the civil complaint responses and what to expect in the coming weeks. Hendricks said the preservation order went through yesterday afternoon. Morrow Inc. financial records at all 4 locations are now frozen pending federal review. Grant Morrow does not yet know the Bureau is involved. He likely believes he is still dealing with a civil matter. Callie said, "When will he know?" Hendricks said, "When he is served. We anticipate that within 10 days. She said, "And the civil complaints against me and Lena." Hendricks said both are being challenged. The evidentiary basis for the theft claims evaporates in the context of the federal investigation. My assessment is that both complaints will be voluntarily withdrawn once Morrow's attorney understands the situation or dismissed shortly after. Callie said, "What about Rex?" Hendricks said Travis Rex is a separate matter but a related one. His involvement in the surveillance and the filing of the harassment complaint in coordination with the civil actions suggests a pattern of coordinated interference. That is being looked at. On the 3rd day, Callie drove back to Shelby County. She went first to the garage on Harlan Mill Road. It was early afternoon and the bay doors were open and the same string of bare bulbs was lit above the overhang and the radio was playing something she did not recognize from somewhere inside. Decker was at the workbench. He looked up when she came in, then went back to what he was working on. She said Lena talked to Ferris. He said, "I know. He called me yesterday. Wanted to know about the club. I told him the same thing I imagine you told him." She said, "What did you tell him?" He said that we are not interested in Grant Morrow's business beyond what it did to Dale Holt and what it is doing to his daughter. That we are not asking for anything except that the right thing get done by the right people through the right channels. She said he seems satisfied with that. Decker said he should be. It is the truth. She set her bag down on the concrete floor and leaned against the nearest workbench. She said, "I have been thinking about what comes after. After the case resolves. After the civil complaints are dropped." He said, "What have you been thinking?" She said, "I want to open my own shop. Not for Morrow, not as an employee. My own. I have been working for someone else for 3 years, and I have been building someone else's client list and someone else's reputation." Decker said, "Where?" She said, "Here, in the county. There is a space on Main Street in Sydney that has been empty for 8 months. The rent is reasonable. The foot traffic is right." He said, "You have a business plan." She said, "I have been sketching one for 2 years. I just needed a reason to stop sketching and start doing." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Your father opened his first shop the same way. Rented a space that needed work, did half the renovation himself, and was so busy from month 1 that he never had time to second guess it. She said, I did not know he had a shop. Decker said before you were born, before he met your mother, he had a small engine repair shop on Crane Road. He ran it for 4 years. He was good with his hands, and he was good with customers, and he understood that reputation was the only thing that made a small business last. He went back to the workbench. He said, I have some startup capital I have been looking for a good use for. She said, no. He said, hear me out. She said, I am not taking club money for a business. You know why? He said, it is not club money, it is mine. From my share of selling a property 2 years ago in Ogilvie County, it has been sitting in an account waiting for something worth doing with it. She looked at him. He said, your father was my friend for 11 years, and I owe him a debt I cannot pay to him directly. I can pay it to you, not as a gift, as a loan with a written agreement and a payment schedule and no favors attached. She was quiet for a moment. She said, a written agreement. He said, drawn up by Hendricks or whoever you choose, clean and legal and nothing else. She said, I will think about it. He said, that is all I am asking. The federal serving of papers on Grant Morrow happened on a Thursday morning, 9 days after Callie's meeting with Ferris at Rosewood Diner. She was at the motel on Route 47, now paid for 2 weeks at a time, when Hendricks called to tell her. She said he has retained federal defense counsel. The civil complaints against you and Lena have already been withdrawn. His attorney filed the withdrawals this morning 20 minutes after service. Callie said that was fast. Hendricks said when someone has competent federal defense counsel, they move quickly on the pieces they can control. The civil complaints were the easiest pieces to let go. They were primarily pressure instruments, and now that the pressure has reversed direction, they serve no purpose. She said, and Rex. Hendricks said Rex is cooperating with the investigation. He retained his own counsel yesterday and began discussions this morning. My understanding is that his cooperation is substantive. Callie said, what does that mean for the timeline? Hendricks said it means things move faster. When the person with operational knowledge of the day-to-day decides to cooperate, the documentation work that might have taken 6 months can be compressed significantly. She said Grant will know Rex is cooperating. Hendricks said he will know soon if he does not already. That is between them. What matters to you is that your documentation combined with Lena's records and your father's original files is being treated as the foundational evidentiary basis for the case. You and Lena will be formally recognized as cooperating witnesses. That carries protections and it carries weight. She said, my father spent 2 years building this. He deserves to be recognized in some way. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. She said, I will raise that with Ferris. There may be ways to formally acknowledge his contribution to the investigation in the public record of the case. I cannot promise what form that takes, but I will raise it. The weeks that followed moved at the pace of institutions rather than people. Callie remained at the Route 47 motel, then moved to a monthly rental in Sydney proper, a second-floor apartment above a hardware store that smelled of sawdust and had windows that looked down at the street below with the particular clarity of height. She kept her appointments with Hendricks. She responded to discovery requests. She did not contact Grant Morrow or anyone at Morrow Inc., not because of the no-contact provision that had already been dissolved, but because there was nothing left to say to any of them that the legal process was not already saying more precisely. She spent her evenings drawing, not client work. She had no client work at present, but her own drawings, the kind she made when there was nothing else to do with her hands, and her mind was working through something that words could not reach. She drew engines mostly, the kind her father had worked on old domestic trucks and motorcycles, and once an ambitious cutaway diagram of a flathead Vob 8 from 1952, rendered in the style of a technical illustration, with every moving part labeled in her father's handwriting, reproduced from memory. She sent the V8 drawing to Decker in an envelope with no note. He called the next morning and said, you remembered the push rod angle wrong. She said, I know. I drew it the way it looked to me when I was 8, not the way it actually was. He said your father would have corrected you. She said, I know that too. There was a brief silence on the line that was comfortable rather than empty. He said the space on Main Street. The landlord called me. She said, you know the landlord. He said, I know most people in this county. He said the space is available through the end of the year if the right tenant comes along. I told him the right tenant was coming. She said, you told him that before I agreed. He said, I told him that before you asked me not to. She thought about it for a moment. She said, send me the loan agreement. He said, Hendricks will call you tomorrow. She walked to the Main Street space that afternoon and stood outside the large front windows and looked through the glass at the empty room inside. It had been a photography studio at some point, judging by the recessed lighting fixtures in the ceiling and the track on one wall where backdrops had been hung. The floors were hardwood scuffed but solid. The back room was large enough for a second station and a small waiting area. The bathroom had been recently retiled. She stood at the window for a long time, not imagining the finished version of the space, but thinking about the work required to get there, which was the way her father had always approached things. The sign above the door said available. She thought not yet, but soon. The trial, when it came, was not in Shelby County. It was in federal court in Dayton, 7 months after the morning Grant Morrow was served. The courtroom was not the setting for drama that movies suggested. It was fluorescent lit and wood-paneled, and it smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner, and it ran on procedure rather than emotion. Callie testified for 4 hours over 2 days. She answered questions from the prosecution and questions from Grant's defense attorney, who was skilled and thorough, and who was operating without the documentary foundation he would have needed to genuinely undermine what she had to say. She answered every question carefully and specifically the way her father had written his notes, without embellishment and without leaving gaps. She described the night she had found the files. She described the drive to Harlan Mill Road in the rain. She described finding the USB in the vest. She described the drive to the truck stop payphone and the conversation with Ferris. She was asked about her father repeatedly, about his time at Morrow Inc., about his motivations, about the nature of his documentation. She answered every question about him in the same careful way she answered everything else, with specificity and without decoration, because he deserved to be described accurately rather than heroically. Lena testified for 2 days. She was steady throughout, the kind of steadiness that came from having prepared for something for 15 years. She described the password. She described the photograph in her locker. She described the conversation with Dale Holt 3 weeks before his hospitalization, when he had told her the drive was in the vest and the vest was for Callie and the password was for her, and she should make sure those two things found each other. She was asked in cross-examination why she had waited so long. She said, "Because he asked me to wait until someone else found the other half. He said if he gave me the whole thing and something happened to me, it would be over. He built it to need 2 people. I waited for the second person." Rex testified under his cooperation agreement for 3 days. His testimony covered the operational structure of TRM Holdings, the mechanism by which cash was moved through the shop system, and the identities of 3 individuals outside the county who had participated in the operation. He was precise and thorough in a way that suggested he had been methodical about his own record-keeping, which was not surprising given his background. He did not look at Grant Morrow during his testimony. Grant did not look at him. On the 4th week of trial, Ferris testified. Near the end of his testimony, responding to a question from the prosecution about the origins of the investigation, he said, "The foundational documentation for this case was assembled between 2007 and 2009 by a man named Dale Holt, a resident of Shelby County, who worked as an independent contractor and had access to the original Morrow Inc. location. Mr. Holt died in early 2010 before he was able to complete his contact with our office. His daughter, Callie Mae Holt, delivered his documentation to me in October of this year, along with additional records she and Lena Marsh had compiled. The case you are seeing in this courtroom was initiated by a man who understood what he had found and chose to act carefully and completely rather than quickly. He was not a federal agent. He was not a lawyer. He was a mechanic who believed that a thing done properly was worth waiting to do right." Callie was in the gallery when Ferris said those words. She was sitting 2 rows behind Lena, who reached back without looking and put her hand briefly on Callie's knee. Grant Morrow was convicted on 11 federal counts. The jury deliberated for 9 hours before returning a verdict, and when the forewoman read each count, Grant sat with his hands folded on the defense table and his face arranged into a careful blankness that Callie recognized as the same expression he had worn every time she had seen him manage something that had not gone the way he planned. He was sentenced in the spring to 14 years. Rex received a reduced sentence of 4 years under his cooperation agreement. The 3 outside participants were the subject of separate proceedings in other jurisdictions, proceedings that Callie read about in the Dayton paper over the following months, and that resolved one by one in the way federal proceedings resolved when the foundational evidence was solid. On the morning after sentencing, Callie drove to the cemetery on the east side of Sydney where her father was buried. The grave marker was a modest gray stone with his name and dates placed there by her mother in 2010 with what money they had at the time. It had done its job for 15 years, standing straight in the ground and holding his name, but it was a small stone for a man who had carried what he had carried. She had arranged for a new stone through a monument company in Findlay that Lena had recommended. It would be placed in 2 weeks larger polished granite with his name and dates, and below them a single line that Callie had chosen herself after thinking about it for 3 weeks. He kept watching until he had what was needed. She stood at the temporary marker and looked at it for a long time without speaking. The cemetery was quiet in the way the October cemeteries were quiet, the leaves mostly down the grass, still green, the particular gray that came before the first real cold of the season. She had brought the vest. She folded it carefully and set it against the base of the stone, the Steele County MC back patch facing out the front panel, with his road name Holt visible in the morning light. She knew it would not stay there, that rain and groundskeepers and time would take it eventually, but she needed to make the gesture in the specific and physical way her father had made his gestures, carefully and in the right place. She said out loud and to no one but the gray October air, "You finished it. You just needed someone to carry the last piece." She stood there until the cold in her hands became too insistent to ignore, and then she walked back to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment with the engine off and thought about what came next, which was no longer a question she was asking into the dark, but a list of things she could actually see. The shop on Main Street in Sydney, the loan agreement she had signed with Decker, 12 months of payments, starting in January, drawn up by Hendricks and witnessed by two people with no connection to anyone involved in the preceding year. The renovation she had already started doing the primer coat herself on the weekends, carrying buckets of warm white paint up the stairs from her car, and working from the back wall forward the way her father had always said, to work from the part no one sees first to the part everyone sees last. The clients who had called over the past 7 months, the ones who had been scheduling around her availability at Route 47 before the shop closed, the ones who had heard what had happened and wanted to give their business to someone who had not blinked when it mattered. She had written their names and appointment requests into a spiral notebook, the same kind of her father had used, and the list was already longer than a first month of operation could accommodate. She drove back towards Sydney with the heater on and the radio low, and the fields outside going from gray to a warmer gray as the sun found a thin place in the clouds and came through. The shop on Main Street in Sydney opened the following March. The name above the door was Holt Inc., black letters on a white sign, clean and simple. The interior was painted in warm whites with exposed brick on the back wall, the kind of space that looked like someone had thought carefully about what made a person feel comfortable in a new place. The portfolio on the front desk was arranged chronologically, starting from her first year as an apprentice and running through to the work she had done in the months since Morrow Inc. had closed its doors when the federal proceedings began pulling its foundations out. The floor was the original hardwood, refinished with two small rugs near the client chairs that Callie had found at an estate sale and liked for reasons she could not fully articulate, beyond the fact that they felt like something that had been in a house rather than purchased for a commercial space. The walls had 3 frame pieces, her own work chosen, not because they were her best technically, but because they were the ones she was most proud of. For other reasons, a full sleeve she had done on a retired firefighter who had been afraid of needles, a chess piece that had taken 11 sessions and which the client had described as his life's record, and a botanical drawing she had done at age 19. That had been the piece which convinced her first employer to take her on. There was a 4th frame on the wall behind the front desk that she had hung on the last day before opening. A mechanical diagram done in the style of an exploded view technical illustration showing every component of a 1970s Harley engine, rendered in precise and loving detail, with each piece labeled in her father's handwriting, style reproduced from memory and from the 3 photographs she had of his actual handwriting, the note from the vest, a birthday card from when she was 7, and a grocery list her mother had kept in a drawer for reasons she had never explained, but which Callie now understood. Decker had looked at the frame diagram during the walkthrough the day before opening and said she had gotten the push rod angle wrong again. She said, "I know, I decided to leave it wrong." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because that is how I remembered it, and this is my shop." He looked at the diagram for another moment. He said, "Fair enough. The opening week was busy in the way Decker had predicted, the way her father's first shop had apparently been busy, the way any shop was busy when the person running it had been working in a community for years and the community had been waiting for a place to go. The county had been without a quality independent shop since the Route 47 location shuttered, and the clients who had come to Cali specifically arrived in the first week with their reference images and their trust already established. She worked long days and short nights and ate her lunch standing at the back counter and forgot dinner twice in the first week and did not mind. She was not tired in the way that needed rest. She was tired in the way that came from doing the thing you had been preparing to do for longer than you realized, the specific exhaustion of arrival. On the second Friday of operation, 34 members of Steele County MC parked their bikes along Main Street in Sydney. The sound arrived before they did the particular low register of that many engines rolling in formation at reduced speed down a main street, careful and deliberate, and the people on the sidewalk stopped and looked, and some of them stepped back, and some of them watched with the frank curiosity of people who had grown up around those sounds and knew what they meant. The bikes parked in a line along the curb in front of Holt Inc., and the men dismounted and secured their rides in the unhurried way of people who were not in a hurry because they were exactly where they had decided to be. They wore their vests, and they did not make any effort to look smaller than they were, but they did not make any effort to look larger either. They came in ones and twos over the course of the afternoon, some for consultations, some to look at the portfolio, some simply to sit in the chairs by the window and drink the coffee Callie had put out, and tell her things about her father that she had not known. One man older with white hair and the deliberate slowness of someone who had arthritis and had decided not to let it hurry him, told her that Dale Holt had once driven 60 miles in the middle of a February night to change a flat tire for a woman who had broken down on a county road and whose phone was dead. He had done it without telling anyone and had never mentioned it again, and the only reason anyone in the club knew was because the woman had called the garage the next morning to leave a message, and the man who took the message had happened to mention it at a Thursday meeting. Another man younger told her that her father had taught him to play chess on a folding board during a long wait at a shop in Columbus in the summer of 2007, and that he had never been able to play since without thinking about the particular way Dale had explained the knight's move, patient and exact, as if the strangeness of it deserved proper explanation rather than just demonstration. A third man said nothing useful at all, but sat in the chair near the window for 40 minutes and looked at the portfolio with the concentrated attention of someone who was seeing something rather than just looking at it, and when he left, he shook her hand and said, "Your father would be proud of you." And she said, "I know, not as a deflection, but as a fact she had come to understand over the preceding 7 months." Not all of the things the men told her were easy to hear. Some of them were funny. Some of them were the kind of thing that made her understand him differently, the places where he had been difficult or stubborn or wrong about something he should have known better about. One man told her with evident affection that Dale Holt had once refused to admit he was wrong about a carburetor adjustment for 3 full days before quietly fixing it in the middle of the night when he thought no one was watching. She appreciated the difficult ones most. They gave her back a father she could actually talk to in her memory rather than a monument. Decker came in last after 5 when the foot traffic had thinned and the afternoon light had gone gold through the front windows and lay across the hardwood floor in long, warm rectangles. He sat in the client chair near the front window and looked at the room with the expression of a man taking inventory for his own private purposes. He said, "Your father opened his shop the same way. Spent the whole first week talking to people. Forgot to eat lunch 3 days running." She said, "I remembered to eat lunch." He said, "Good. He never learned." He looked at the framed mechanical diagram on the wall behind the front desk. She said, "I know the push rod angle is wrong." He said, "I know you know." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the labeled parts the handwriting reproduced from memory and from a birthday card and a grocery list. He said he would have had opinions about the paint color. She said he would have said it needed more red. Decker said exactly. He stood to leave, and she came around the front desk and held out the vest. She had retrieved it from the cemetery 2 days after leaving it there folded and carried it home in the car, understood that the gesture had been made and the physical object was still hers. He said, "That belongs with you." She said, "I know, but I want you to do something with it first." He looked at her. She said, "Put his name on the wall at the garage, next to whoever else you keep there." He earned it. He was part of that club even after he left it in the way that matters more than the membership. Decker took the vest. He held it the way he had held it the first night on Harlan Mill Road, carefully with both hands, as if it weighed exactly as much as it should. He said, "I will do that." She said, "Bring it back when you are done. It goes behind the desk." He nodded once the particular Decker nod that meant the thing was as good as done. He walked out the front door and the bell above it rang once bright and clean, and through the window she watched 34 bikes start up along Main Street in a sound like controlled thunder, steady and deliberate, rolling north toward Harlan Mill Road in the late afternoon light. She stood at the window until the sound faded into the distance and became indistinguishable from the other sounds of the county. In the early evenings, the trucks on Route 33, the grain dryers running out past the edge of town, the particular hum of a small city going about its business as the light changed. Then she went back to her station and pulled out the reference sheet for the first appointment of the next morning, a full-sleeve design that a client had been planning for 2 years and which was finally ready to begin. She studied the reference sheet for a few minutes, making small notes in the margins, the way she always did before a long piece. And then she set it aside and looked at the empty shop around her. The warm white walls and the hardwood floors and the three-frame pieces and the diagram with the wrong pushrod angle. She thought about her father at 37, sitting at a computer in the original Route 47 location, opening a folder he was not supposed to see. She thought about the decision he had made in that moment to say nothing and begin watching instead. She thought about how that decision had required a particular kind of patience, the patience of someone who understood that the difference between a good outcome and a great one was not speed, but willingness to keep looking at a thing until you understood it well enough to act on it precisely. He had taught her that. He had taught her in drawings and in engine diagrams, and in the careful way he had explained the knight's move on a folding chessboard on a Tuesday in summer patient, and exact as if the strangeness of it deserved proper explanation rather than just demonstration. She had not known she was being taught. She knew it now. She turned off the overhead light, leaving only the recessed fixtures above the portfolio desk, glowing warm, and gathered her jacket and her bag and her keys. At the door, she turned back and looked at the room one more time, the way you looked at something you had built and were not yet used to being real. The vest would come back from Harlan Mill Road in a week. It would hang behind the front desk where every client could see it, and the Steele County MC back patch would face outward, and her father's road name would be visible in the front panel, and the people who knew what it meant would understand what kind of place they were in, and the people who did not know would simply see a piece of worn leather that had clearly been carried a long way and treated with care. Both were correct. She locked the door and walked to her car in the last of the evening light, and the street was quiet, and the sign above the door was clear. And the name on it was the right name, the only name it had ever been going to be from the moment she had driven past her trailer in the rain and turned left on Harlan Mill Road and made herself available to finish what her father had started. The appointment book was full for the next 3 weeks. Her hands were steady. The light in the shop was good. She had not always been the kind of person who could wait. When she was 17, she had quit her first apprenticeship after 3 months because the man running the shop had told her her line work was sloppy, and she had walked out instead of asking him to show her how to fix it. She had spent 6 months doing flash designs for $20 each at a booth in a flea market before the shame of it settled into something useful, and she had gone back to the original shop. Not to the same man who had moved away by then, but to a woman named Karen who worked in the back room and who had known Callie's mother from a church group in the early years, and who had agreed to take Callie on because she said she could always tell whether a person could be taught by looking at their hands. Karen had looked at Callie's hands for a moment and said, "You grip too hard. You are trying to control the line instead of following it." It had taken Callie 3 months to understand what that meant, and another 3 months to fix it, and the process of fixing it had felt exactly like the process of learning to be patient, which was not the suppression of urgency, but the redirection of it, the energy of wanting something applied to the craft of building toward it, rather than the demand of having it immediately. She thought about Karen sometimes when she was working on a difficult piece the way she thought about her father, as one of the people who had shaped the hands that were now doing the work without thinking about how the shaping had happened. The years between Karen's shop and Morrow Inc. had been the kind of years that look formative in retrospect and feel like survival in the moment. She had worked 3 shops in 5 years, each better than the last, each teaching her something the previous one had not. She had built her portfolio with the particular intensity of someone who understood that her work was the only thing that would move her forward and that no one was going to move her forward for her. She had been good at that part, the work, the long hours with her head down and her hands moving, and the world outside the shop reduced to a background noise she could manage. She had been less good at the other parts, the contracts, the client management, the business side of things, that she had always treated as a necessary inconvenience rather than a skill to be developed. Grant Morrow had seemed in the beginning like a solution to the parts she was not good at. He handled the business. He handled the marketing. He handled the contracts and the scheduling and the landlord negotiations and the supply orders and the 15 other things that a shop needed to function that were not the actual work of tattooing. He had presented himself as a patron of craft, a man who understood that artists needed a protected space in which to be excellent, and that he was the person who could provide that space. She had believed him, not entirely, not uncritically, but enough to take that and stay in it for 3 years, while the misgivings she occasionally felt about the way certain things were handled stayed in the category of things she was telling herself not to examine too closely. She understood now that this had been its own kind of impatience, not the urgency of wanting something immediately, but the impatience of not wanting to see something that would require her to change a situation she had worked hard to build. She had been doing at 30 what she had done at 17, choosing not to look at the thing that was uncomfortable to look at. The difference was that at 17 she had not had a father's note to read. She had not yet understood that the most important skill she had been taught was not how to follow a line, but how to keep watching until she understood what she was looking at. She had understood it when she read his handwriting on the lined paper from the spiral notebook, cramped and careful, and aimed at a future he was not certain he would reach. That was the moment she stopped being the person who did not look. The renovation of the Main Street space had taken 8 weeks. She had done more of it herself than Decker had expected, and less of it herself than she had initially planned, because the electrical work required a licensed electrician and the plumbing for the sterilization station required a licensed plumber. And she had learned in the first week that there was a difference between the tasks she could learn quickly and the tasks that required years of specific knowledge she did not have and was not going to acquire. Her father would have appreciated that distinction. He had been meticulous about the difference between the things he could fix and the things he could not, and he had never confused the two out of pride or impatience. She had watched him as a child call a specialist for a job that he could technically have attempted himself, and when she had asked him why, he had said, "Because I can do it almost right, or I can have it done exactly right, and almost right is fine until it is not fine, and then it is a serious problem." She had called the electrician. She had called the plumber. She had done the primer and the painting and the floor, refinishing herself, working on weekends with the radio on and her phone on the workbench, playing the same classic rock station she had grown up hearing from the garage on Harlan Mill Road, and the work had felt like a different kind of patience than anything the preceding months had required. The legal work had been the patience of enduring something. The renovation had been the patience of building something. She knew what she preferred. Lena had come up from Finley for the second weekend of renovation and helped with the trim work, which she was better at than Callie, having spent 2 years doing finished carpentry with a boyfriend in her late 20s. They had worked through a Saturday afternoon mostly in silence, the comfortable silence of two people who had already said the important things and did not need to fill the space between them with noise. At one point, Lena had said, without stopping in her brush, "I want to tell you something about your father that I have not told you yet." Callie said, "All right." Lena said he was frightened. For most of those 2 years, he was documenting he was frightened. Not in a way he showed, but I could tell because I knew him well enough to see it. He was afraid that he would not finish it before something happened. He was afraid that what he was building would not be enough. He was afraid that he was wrong about Grant, not that he had invented the evidence, but that he had somehow misread it, that there was an innocent explanation he had not considered, and that he was going to destroy someone's life over a mistake in his own reasoning. She paused. She said he checked his work constantly. He went back over every piece of documentation he had and looked for the alternative explanation, the innocent version, the reading that would let Grant be what he appeared to be. He did it for 2 years and he never found it. Not once. And I think the fact that he never stopped looking for the innocent explanation is one of the things that made what he built so solid. He was not a man who wanted to be right. He was a man who wanted to be accurate. Callie had kept painting through this, not stopping, not turning around. She said, "That sounds like him." Lena said it does. It also sounds like you. Callie did not answer that. She did not need to. They finished the trim work by 5 and cleaned the brushes and drove to a diner on the edge of town for coffee and pie, and they sat in a booth by the window, the way women who had been through something together sometimes sat, not facing each other directly, but sitting at an angle that allowed for conversation without requiring it, looking at the street outside and the ordinary late afternoon business of a small city that knew nothing about the preceding 7 months and did not need to. The deposition that Callie had given to Hendricks in preparation for the trial had taken 9 hours over 2 days. She had been asked about every decision she had made, from the moment she found the files to the moment she sat down in Rosewood Diner with Carl Ferris. She had answered each question with the care she had given to everything else in that period, because she understood by then that the care was not a burden, but a practice, the same practice her father had kept for 2 years, and that she had learned from watching him without knowing she was watching. The defense attorney had asked her during cross-examination whether she had any personal animosity toward Grant Morrow. She had said, "No, I worked for him for 3 years and I did not enjoy working for him, but I was not angry at him. I was angry at what he had done to my father." The defense attorney had said, "And what exactly do you believe he did to your father?" She had said, "I believe he ran an operation that my father discovered and documented, and that when my father attempted to report it, my father died before he could complete that report, and that the question of whether those two things are connected is something the evidence will address better than I can." The defense attorney had looked at her for a moment and then moved to the next question. Hendricks had told her afterward that it was one of the better answers she had seen from a witness in a long time, not because it was clever, but because it was exactly true and refused to be more than exactly true. Callie had said my father would have said the same thing. Hendricks had said, "I know. I read his statement 4 times before the trial." Grant Morrow had not looked at Callie during her testimony. He had looked at his hands, or at the table, or at some point in the middle distance that was not any person in the room. She had not found this satisfying the way she had expected she might. She had expected some version of confrontation, some moment in which the thing was resolved between them as people, and what had happened instead was that the thing had been resolved between the evidence and the law, which was not the same and was also she had come to understand better. Her father had known that. He had spent 2 years building something that could resolve itself without requiring him to be in the room when it happened, because he had understood that his presence might not be guaranteed and that the work had to stand on its own. It had stood. She had been in the room, but she had also understood by the time she sat in the witness chair that she was there as the carrier of something her father had built, rather than as the person who had built it, and that this was not a lesser role but a different one, and that it had required its own kind of work and its own kind of patience and its own particular willingness to look at things until you understood them. The sentencing hearing had been brief. Grant Morrow had made a statement before sentencing in which he said, among other things, that he had made decisions he regretted and that he understood the consequences of those decisions. He did not mention Dale Holt. He did not mention Callie. He did not mention the people whose money he had moved through a system built on the labor of artists who had not known what they were part of. The judge had listened to the statement and then had sentenced him to 14 years without inflection, as if the statement had not changed the calculus by any detectable amount. Callie had watched from the gallery and felt the particular clarity of a thing that was over. Not resolved in the way stories resolved, not tied up or explained or rendered meaningful by a final scene. Just over. The machine her father had set in motion 15 years ago had run its course, and the law had done the thing the law was designed to do, imperfectly and slowly and without drama. And the man who had done the thing that started the machine was going to spend 14 years in a federal facility thinking about whatever people thought about in that situation. She had driven home from the sentencing on county roads instead of the highway the long way, the way that went past the Lutheran church with the fixed gutters and the grain elevator, and the collapsed barn that someone had finally started to tear down in the fall, and which was now a pile of weathered boards waiting to be hauled away. She had driven past the cemetery, but had not stopped. She had already said what she had to say there. She had driven past the trailer park where she had lived for 2 years and had felt nothing in particular about it which had seemed right. The trailer had been a temporary thing, and she had never pretended otherwise, and the absence of sentiment about leaving it was itself a kind of honesty. She had driven to the apartment above the hardware store which smelled of sawdust, and had windows that looked down at the street with the particular clarity of height, and she had made coffee and sat at the small table in the kitchen and looked at the appointment book she had been keeping in the spiral notebook and thought about what came next. What came next was the shop on Main Street. What came next was the sign with the right name above the door. What came next was the work which had always been the thing that came next, which had been the thing that had always been there when the other things shifted and changed and resolved themselves and became the past. She had a client scheduled for 9 the next morning. A woman in her late 40s who had been carrying a design idea for 3 years and had finally decided to act on it. A botanical piece wildflowers from the area where she had grown up, rendered in a loose and detailed style that Callie had been thinking about for 2 weeks. She had sketched several versions of it in the evenings and had settled on an approach that used negative space in a way she had not done before, letting the skin itself become part of the design rather than simply the surface it was applied to. She was not certain it would work. She was certain it was worth attempting. Her father had once said on a morning she could not date precisely, but which had the feeling of a Saturday in spring, that the difference between a repair that looked like a repair and one that looked like it had always been that way was whether the person doing it was trying to hide the intervention or honor the original. He had been talking about an engine at the time, something with a cracked housing that he was deciding how to address, and she had been sitting on a stool nearby, drawing horses in a notebook while he talked more to himself than to her. She had understood what he meant even at the age she had been in the way children understood things before they had words for the understanding. You did not try to make the repair invisible. You made it true. You made it part of the thing rather than a correction of it, and then the thing was whole in a way that included its history rather than concealing it. She applied that to tattooing in the way she had come to apply most things her father had said carefully, and after a long delay arriving at the understanding gradually rather than all at once. She applied it to the botanical design for the woman who had been carrying the idea for 3 years. She applied it to the sign above the door. She applied it to the fact that the diagram behind the front desk had the wrong pushrod angle, and she had left it that way on purpose. The week after the opening, she had a conversation with Nora Bennett from Rosewood Diner, who had driven over to Sydney specifically to see the shop, and who had arrived on a Tuesday morning with a container of homemade cookies and the particular expression of someone who had been looking forward to a thing and was not disappointed by it. Nora had walked through the space slowly looking at the portfolio and the framed pieces in the diagram on the wall, and then she had sat in the client chair near the window and eaten one of the cookies and looked at Callie with the directness she had shown on the night everything began. She said, "The night your father left that note in the vest, he must have been afraid." Callie said, "Probably, yes." Nora said, "But he did it anyway. He sewed it in and he left it for you, and he trusted that you would find it when it was time." Callie said, "He trusted that I would have help finding it. He did not leave it for me alone. He left it for me and for Decker and for Lena. He built a system that required all three of us." Nora said, "That is a particular kind of faith, trusting not one person but a combination of people bound to do something together that none of them could do separately." Callie said he was good at understanding systems. Nora was quiet for a moment. She said, "We put a sign up at the diner. After that night with the little girl, the one who came in out of the rain, we put up a sign that says, 'If you feel unsafe, ask for help here.' It has been there for 4 years now." Callie said, "I know, I read about it." Nora said, "Your father built something that lasted 15 years and ended in a federal courtroom. I put up a sign that costs nothing and fits in a frame. They are not the same scale of thing." She paused. She said, "But I think the impulse is the same. You see something that should not be, and you decide not to look away. And then you figure out the right size of the response." Callie thought about that for a moment. She said, "My father's response was 15 years of careful documentation in a USB drive sewn into a vest collar." Nora said, "That is one size of response." Callie said, "What is yours?" Nora said, "A sign in a diner window and a brighter bulb above the payphone and a habit of watching who is sitting alone for too long. That is my size of response." She finished her cookie and stood and looked at the shop one more time before she left. She said, "He would be proud of this place." Callie said, "People keep telling me that." Nora said, "Because it is true, and some true things need to be said more than once before they settle." She left the container of cookies and walked out, and the bell above the door rang once clear and simple, the same bell it had rung for Decker, and would ring for every person who came through the door in the years ahead. Callie stood behind the front desk and listened to the bell settle into silence. Outside Main Street went on with its ordinary business, the hardware store below her receiving a delivery, the coffee shop across the street opening its second round of the morning, a man walking a large dog in the particular way of someone who had nowhere to be and was glad of it. The appointment book was open on the desk. The 9 o'clock name was there in her handwriting, neat and specific, the design notes in the margin in the smaller writing she used for reminders to herself. She picked up the book and read through the week, not looking for anything in particular, just reading the names and the notes and the designs, the accumulated plans of people who had decided they were ready for something permanent, something that would be part of them in a way that could not be undone. She understood that impulse better now than she had 3 years ago. She understood the value of the permanent thing, the thing that did not change with the situation, the thing that said, this happened, this was real, this is part of the record. Her father had understood it too in his own way, with his spiral notebook and his USB drive, and his careful handwriting aimed at a future he was not certain he would reach. She put the appointment book down and went to check that the autoclave had run its full cycle and the stations were set for the morning, the ordinary preparations for the ordinary work of a craft she had been learning for 12 years and would be learning for the rest of her life. The light in the shop was good. The appointment book was full. Her hands were steady. Outside, Shelby County went about its business as it always had, and the name above the door of the shop on Main Street said what it was going to say from that day forward, simple and clear, the right name, her father's name, the name she had always been going to carry into whatever came next. Holt Inc. The vest came back from Harlan Mill Road 8 days after the opening. Decker brought it himself on a Wednesday afternoon when she had a gap between appointments, arriving without calling ahead in the way that was consistent with everything else about him doing the thing when the thing was ready to be done, rather than announcing it in advance. He came through the door with the vest folded over his arm and looked at the shop the way he had looked at it the first time, taking inventory, and then he set the vest on the front desk and stepped back. She picked it up. On the inside back panel, in the same place where her father had sewn in the USB sleeve, there was now a small leather patch, hand-cut and hand-stitched dark brown, against the black lining with her father's road name stamped into it in the same font as the tag on the front. Holt. And below it, in smaller letters, 2 dates. She looked at it for a moment and then looked at Decker. He said the date he joined and the date he left, both in the club record. He earned both of them. She turned the vest over and looked at the back patch, the Steele County MC insignia that had faded over 15 years of being folded in a storage box. The colors were still there, still legible, the particular design that the club had been riding under for 30 years. She said he never wore this after he left. Decker said, I know. He put it away because he thought wearing it without being active would be disrespectful. He was wrong about that, but he believed it. He was the kind of man who took the obligation seriously enough that he would rather go without than go halfway. She said he was wrong about that specific thing. He said he was, but the instinct behind it was right. He took the obligation seriously. That part was right. She walked to the wall behind the front desk and hung the vest on the hook she had put there 3 weeks before the opening, placed at a height and angle that made the back patch visible from the client chairs and the front panel visible from the desk itself. She stepped back and looked at it hanging there against the warm white wall. It looked like it had always been there. Decker stood behind her and looked at it. He said your father would have argued about the placement. She said he would have wanted it higher. He said he always wanted everything slightly higher than it needed to be. He said it was so he could see it from across the room, but I think he just liked things to be elevated. She turned and found Decker almost smiling, which was as close as he came, and she did not make anything of it, because making something of it would have changed what it was. She said, thank you for going back to the garage with it, for doing that specifically. He said he was my friend for 11 years and he was good at it. That deserves a wall. He left without staying for coffee, which was also consistent with everything about him, and she went back to preparing for the afternoon appointment and did not think about the vest for the rest of the day, which meant that it was exactly where it should be, part of the room rather than the subject of it. The first month of the shop's operation established rhythms that she had not entirely predicted. She had expected the work itself to set the rhythm, the appointments, and the sessions, and the hours of focused effort that made up the actual substance of the business. What she had not expected was the degree to which the shop became a place where people talked. Not in the way people talked to therapists or confessed to friends, In the way people talked when they were sitting still for a long time, and the person working near them was focused on a task, and the combination of stillness and focused attention created a particular kind of space in which things could be said that were harder to say in other circumstances. She had experienced this at other shops. She had not expected it to happen so consistently and so specifically at her own. A retired history teacher spent 4 sessions over 6 weeks talking about her late husband, while Callie worked on the botanical piece. And the stories she told were not the cleaned-up version of grief, but the particular and complicated truth of a long marriage. The things she missed that were not the obvious things, and the things she did not miss, that she felt she was not supposed to say aloud, and which she said anyway because the shop felt like a place where the truth about complicated things could be expressed without judgment. A man who worked at the grain elevator came in for a single session and talked for 4 hours about his son, who was in the army and stationed somewhere he was not supposed to name, and the conversation moved from pride to fear to the particular helplessness of loving someone who was in a place you could not reach. And at the end of the session, he looked at the piece on his forearm and said, "That is exactly right," meaning the design. But she understood that he meant something else too. A woman in her late 30s came in with a reference image she had been carrying in her wallet for 2 years, a drawing her daughter had made at age 7, and she wanted it reproduced exactly as the child had drawn it, all the proportions wrong, and the lines unsteady, and the colors chosen with the logic of a 7-year-old rather than the logic of a person who understood what colors meant. Callie had reproduced it exactly, every crooked line, every color choice, every place where the child's hand had pressed too hard or too light. And when the woman saw the finished piece, she had cried, in the way people cried when something was exactly right, not from sadness, but from recognition. These were the things the work was made of. Not only the technical skill and the design decisions and the hours of precise effort, but also the particular attention she paid to the person in the chair, the willingness to be present with them in whatever they were carrying into the shop, and to translate it insofar as anything could be translated into something permanent and specific in theirs. Her father had said once on the same Saturday morning with the cracked housing that the reason he liked engine work over body work was that with an engine you were working on the thing that made the other thing move, the part that was not visible, but was the reason everything else could function. He had said it in the context of explaining why he had turned down a job doing custom paint on a restored car, a job that would have paid better, and she had not fully understood what he meant until she was old enough to understand the difference between work that was visible and work that was necessary. She thought about that distinction sometimes when she was working, not often and not at length, but in the peripheral way you thought about the things that had formed you while you were doing the thing they had formed you to do. The work was not the visible thing. The visible thing was the piece on the skin, the design, the color, the line, the forme. The work was the attention behind it, the willingness to keep looking until you understood what the person needed, and then to give them that thing precisely without substituting your own idea of what was better. Her father had understood that about engine work. She understood it about tattooing. The form was different, and the tools were different, and the result was different. But the principle was the same principle, and she carried it the way she carried the other things he had taught her, in her hands, in her habits, in the patience that had finally, after 24 years, become something she did not have to think about, but simply had. The spring the shop opened was warm and came early, and the Main Street trees put out their leaves in the second week of March while there was still frost on the mornings, and the combination of warm afternoons and cold mornings made the county feel like a place that could not decide whether it was done with one season or ready for the next. Callie did not mind the indecision. She had learned to work in conditions that were not quite settled, to do the precise thing in the middle of the uncertain context, to find the steady point from which the work could be done well, regardless of what was happening around it. She opened the shop at 8 each morning and closed it at 6, and spent an hour after closing doing the administrative work that kept the business running, the scheduling and the ordering and the bookkeeping that she had once left to Grant Morrow, and which she now handled herself with the help of a software system Hendricks had recommended, and a habit of checking the numbers on Friday afternoons, the way her father had checked his work, looking for the alternative explanation, the innocent reading the version that did not add up to the conclusion she already suspected. The numbers always added up to the right conclusion. The business was solvent. The client list was growing. The loan payments to Decker came out of the business account on the first of each month with the automatic reliability of something that had been set up correctly from the beginning. She would be finished paying the loan in 11 months. She had told Decker this on the phone in March, mentioning it in the way you mentioned something that was going according to plan, not to impress him, but because he had been part of the plan and deserved to know how the plan was going. He had said, "Your father would have paid it off in 9." She had said, "My father also forgot to eat lunch 3 days running." He had said, "That is a fair point." She had finished the call and gone back to the client notes for the next morning and thought about the vest on the wall behind the front desk and the appointment book full of names and the tools laid out in their particular order on the station surface and the window above the door that showed a strip of March sky still pale and not quite warm, but moving in the right direction. She thought about the moment in the garage on Harlan Mill Road when she had read her father's note for the first time and felt the floor drop away and found the ground beneath it. She thought about the long patience of a man who had understood that the right thing done carefully was worth waiting to do, and who had trusted the people around him to hold the pieces he could not hold himself. She thought about the particular trust involved in that, the trust not of certainty but of careful judgment, the trust of a man who had looked at the people he was leaving the work to and had decided after everything that they would know what to do when the time came. He had been right. She had been one of the people he trusted. And she had done the thing, and the thing had been done right, and the right person had been held to account, and the record was correct, and his name was on the wall in the garage on Harlan Mill Road, and on the sign above the door of a shop on Main Street in Sydney, and in the federal court record of a case that had taken 15 years and 2 generations and 3 people with different pieces of the same puzzle to bring to completion. That was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the most important thing she had done. And it was done. And the work that came after it was the work she had always been going to do, the work her hands were trained for, and her patience had prepared her for, and her father had spent a Saturday morning in her childhood teaching her to love without calling it a lesson. The light came through the window above the front door in the early morning and fell across the hardwood floor in a long rectangle that moved west as the day progressed. And she watched it move without watching it, aware of it. In the peripheral way, she was aware of the things that were always there, the constants that let you navigate the variables. The appointment book was full for the next 3 weeks. Her hands were steady. The light in the shop was good. And in the morning, she would open the door and do the work, and the work would be good, and the day would pass in the particular way of days when you are doing the thing you are supposed to be doing without urgency and without regret, and with the patient attention that her father had spent a lifetime teaching her was the only thing that made any of it last. There was a moment sometime in the second week of the shop's operation when she understood something about her father that she had not understood before. She had been finishing a session with a client, a man in his 60s, who had come in for a memorial piece for his brother, and they had been talking through the end of the session about the design, about what it meant and where it had come from, and why he had decided now was the time, and he had said something that she had heard before from other clients, but which landed differently that particular afternoon. He had said, "I kept putting it off because I thought I needed to wait until I knew exactly what I wanted. Then I realized that waiting to know exactly was the same thing as never doing it." She had kept working while he said this and had not responded immediately, and he had not required a response, which was the kind of conversation that happened in the shop with some regularity, the kind where the person saying the thing was saying it to themselves as much as to her, and where the correct response was simply to let it settle. But she had thought about it afterward while she was cleaning the station and logging the session notes in the appointment book, and she had understood something she had been circling around for several months. Her father had not known exactly what was going to happen when he sewed the USB into the vest collar. He had not known that Callie would take a job at Morrow Inc. He had not known that the system crash would happen on a Tuesday night when she was alone in the shop. He had not known that she would drive to Harlan Mill Road in the rain and find Decker at the bay door with a wrench in his hand. He had built a system that could accommodate not knowing. He had built it with enough redundancy, enough pieces held by enough people, that it did not require him to know exactly. It only required that the pieces be real and the people be reliable and the direction be right. He had known those 3 things, and he had trusted that the rest would follow. She had been the rest. She closed the appointment book and looked at the vest on the wall behind the desk and thought, that is the whole lesson. That is the thing he was teaching every time he sat at that kitchen table with his coffee and his piece of paper, not what to document or how to document it, but that the work done with care in the right direction would find its way to the right ending, even if you were not there to see it arrive. She turned off the station light and picked up her jacket and walked to the door. The bell rang once when she opened it. She stepped out onto Main Street and locked the door behind her and looked up at the sign with her father's name on it, white letters on a clean field, visible from half a block away, the way her father had always wanted things elevated just enough to be seen from across the room. She walked to her car in the evening air, with her keys in her hand and the appointment book in her bag, and the knowledge settled and certain now in the way things became uncertain after you had lived with them long enough that the work had been done right and the name was in the right place and the next morning would come, the way mornings came when you had done the thing you were supposed to do. The light above the sign stayed on after she left. It was on a timer she had set for the hours when the street was quiet and the county was sleeping, and there was no one to see it, but the sign was there anyway, clear and correct, doing what it was supposed to do, which was simply to be present and to say what it said. Holt Inc.